I have to apologize that this is going to be in English, but the good news is that I could be doing this in Chinese and it would be a lot worse. So my Russian is good enough to order a few things in the market, but not to make a presentation, so I apologize for that. And the other challenge I have this morning is that I have to say in 30 minutes a presentation that was prepared for 45. So if I speak a little bit faster, please bear with me, and I'll be around if you have any questions later. It will be a pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be in Ukraine. Every time I come to Ukraine, my friends in Western Europe, and last week I was in New York, and I said that I would be here this week, and people were asking me, how is the crisis in Ukraine? And I said, well, I left that about 10 years ago when I left Ukraine. There was a big crisis in Ukraine. And when I talk to my father, who is 91 years old, and I talk to him about crisis in the marketplace, he normally looks at me in total disbelief, and he says, crisis? What crisis? I mean, this is a man who lived the Second World War and didn't have anything to eat for many months, had to walk for 600 kilometers from a concentration camp back to Belgium. So talking to him about crisis these days is a little bit of a joke. But the reality is that the whole world has gone to a significant amount of crisis. And when I put the word crisis up, I like to mention the two components of the word crisis in the Chinese language, which basically means a problem and an opportunity. We have a problem. The whole economy is there, showing that we have a problem. Capitalism seems to be reached its end in some societies, and we need to redo things. We need to rethink things. What is the way out of this crisis? What is the opportunity, as the Chinese say? And that's what we're trying to do. The reality is that anybody who is in marketing, who is in new product development, who is in innovation, is in a permanent state of crisis. Fundamentally, because more than 2/3 of what we do, what we launch in the marketplace, fail. If you ask me what is the most important characteristics you need to have to be in marketing, I normally say you have to be a masochist and you have to learn how to fail. Because if you don't know how to fail, you should not be in marketing. Because most of what we do tends to fail in the marketplace. Secondly, products never stop being launched. In 2005, and the number for 2010 is very similar to that, a new product is launched in the world every 3 minutes. Now, 85% of them will fail. So you see what that means. It's a constant state of crisis because we don't know what's going to fail, what's not going to fail. And a lot of the resources that companies used towards developing products, coming up with new ideas, go down the drains as well. So a lot of people have been making a lot of money writing books about crisis. I have a very good friend in the US called Bill George, who was the CEO of a couple of companies. He's a professor at Harvard Business School and at the MIT. And he wrote this little book called 7 Lessons in Leading in Crisis. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about how innovation can help companies out of crisis, how businesses can be helped by new thinking, which is very much inspired by some of the lessons for leading in crisis. The first lesson that you have to lead in a crisis, and anybody who has been through a divorce knows what that is face reality. Start with yourself. Don't blame anybody. Look at your own company. Where are the difficulties? Where are the problems that you have? What do you need to do? Don't be Atlas, the mythological character. Get the world off your shoulders. You cannot solve all the problems. Look for the root causes of the problems. Dig very deeply to understand those problems. Get ready for the long haul. Because 10 years from now, there's probably going to be another crisis, and you have come out of this crisis today, and you'd be in a completely different position. Never waste a good crisis. That's very important. A good crisis is a great opportunity to build something totally new. You have to follow your compass. That's an opportunity to really, really exercise leadership. And marketing has a significant role to do that. And of course, focus on winning now. It's not sufficient to be in a crisis thinking that you'll be winning 6 months from now, 2 years from now. You have to have the quick wins, and they have to be now. So if you look at this, you basically say that a crisis is an opportunity to define yourself, yourself meaning your company, your business. It's a defining moment, because if you follow all those, you have to define yourself. And how do you apply this to market innovation? First of all, avoid denial. Denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is in Egypt, but denial is something else. Avoid denial. You have to accept that there is a crisis. You have to accept that things are there. Also being misled by temporary blips, meaning temporary good news, stuff that happens in the market that you say, wow, good news. Sales increased 0.3% this week. This is not necessarily good news. Don't read too much into good news in the middle of a crisis. And then, of course, be fact-based, fact-based, fact-based. Many companies, they tend to operate in what I like to call a fact-free environment. They tend to operate on the basis of instinct rather than intuition, rather than facts. A crisis is an enormous moment for being fact-based. And finally, shift all the testing. Forget all the testing that you're doing, because people behave completely different in times of crisis, and you have an opportunity to couple conventional market research with some new stuff. The new stuff is there. Neurosciences. I'm working with companies now that are reading what happens in the brains of people when they are faced with choice for a product. Ethnographic studies, consumer engineering, ideation speed dating, ideas, ideas, ideas. Allow ideas to be ideas. One of the fastest ways to kill an idea is to turn it into a project too soon. Ideas have to be allowed to be ideas before they become concepts, before they become projects. You cannot turn an idea into a project immediately. You have to allow ideas to be ideas. And move to observations, to living with the user. We have to be observers of people, but not become what I call naval observers. Observing yourself, observing the company itself, spending a lot of time understanding the company. The first thing that most companies do when they have a crisis, they try to restructure. And then they go for 1 year changing themselves, and by the time they restructure, the market has changed so much that they don't know what to do, because the organization is no longer valid for the market that changed. Extend on networks, accept failure, and outsource the unthinkable. Even things that you didn't think before, maybe you need to start thinking about, which is outsourcing things that you didn't think about outsourcing. Looking for the root cause is very important. Why is that? Because you need to first understand that there are symptoms when you see a crisis, but they're not the real problems. You have to look for the symptoms deeper. You have to watch out for quality deviations. As you start cost reducing, products become different. And cost reduction leads to products of a lower quality in many cases. And it's very risky to reach that limit, because rejection will happen at a time of crisis and will be remembered. And of course, avoiding fixedness. What does that mean? Is avoiding the obvious. There are things you don't do. So companies become innovative when they start thinking about things they never thought about before. You can take a very stupid idea, the way you park a car. You always park a car by moving the car backwards. Why do you have to move the car backwards? If you want to be innovative, you can change the wheels in the back of the car and try to park the car, with the front first. Why not? And that's the kind of thinking that we need to avoid at times of crisis. Remember that hope is not a strategy, and wishful thinking is not planning. How many times have you been in meetings that people go there and they say, I hope that we'll have good results with this? I said, well, that's the end of the meeting for me, because I do not really believe hope is a strategy. You have to go to meetings at this time of crisis with the people that normally don't come to meetings. Most people who come to meetings, they are what I call the yes butters. Yes butters are those people that listen to you for about an hour, and they say in the end, yes, but, and then they tell you 100 reasons why not. Now, I prefer to have what I call the no butters. People who say, no, 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 this is a bad idea. But if you do this, if you do that, that will be much better. So the yes batters are dangerous in times of crisis. The no batters are the people you really want to see there. Look out for early warning signals, and lessons from crises in the past are very, very critical. At the same time, as Machiavelli said, never waste the opportunities offered by a good crisis. They offer a great opportunity for you to transform your product lines, to really look at the fact that you have to accept a shift in gears, in some cases moving to margins versus volumes, because that's the way that you have to trade off in most crises. That's how most companies trade off. And in any crisis, cash is king. And Warren Buffett actually said a few months ago that in a crisis, cash is not king, cash is God. You know, because you have to focus on the cash flow. And at the same time, fuel the future, and that's the time to get lean. So everything in a crisis is amplified. You have to generate new sublines of products. You have to come up with ideas that will focus on the opportunity, lines that might even be discontinued as you are working in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of an economic situation that changed. And surviving the crisis is only half of the challenge. Many people think that being in a crisis is like drowning. If you survive, that's good enough. That's not good enough. Surviving is only half of it. What you do after that, winning after the crisis, that's where the opportunity really is. And finally, you have to emerge from a crisis knowing that the product lines that you have will never be the same. They will be different. There will be new people. There will be new habits that have been implemented. And of course, adapting the focus to winning with these new product portfolios is what really counts. So the 7 steps to focus on winning with a market new product development portfolio, with an innovation portfolio, involve rethinking the role, shedding the weaklings. It's always easy in innovation to bring the new ideas in. The most difficult part is to get rid of the old ideas. And that's what you need to do. In other words, move the old ideas out instead of just bringing the new ideas in. A downturn is time for investments in new technologies. You have to be multidisciplinary, but most importantly, execution becomes key. Execute, execute, execute rigorously. There's never been a time where execution is so important as the time of a crisis. The problem with this, however, is that we end up staying in the middle of things. Because what is happening in the marketplace with economic crisis? You have the premium brands that tend to move down a little bit. You have now luxury goods. You look at the Louis Vuitton shop in Paris or in Moscow or whatever. They're starting making a lot of smaller items because they become more affordable. So the entry-level price is lower and all this. So they're toning down their premium. The value brands begin to improve somehow. And there is a need for a new innovation curve, because otherwise you end up in the middle of the range. 50-50 compromise is the worst thing that can happen to any business, because at the end of the day, that's the avenue to mediocrity. So remember that one big advantage of mediocre people over all of us is the fact that they are always operating at 100% of their capacity. They're always there, between 49 and 51%. They are amazingly effective. But the problem is that if we are in a day that we are lower than 50, they will dominate it. Bureaucracy will take over. All the obvious will take over. And we have to make sure that this doesn't happen by actually focusing on staying out of this middle arena. How do you do this thing? You do by looking at premium pricing versus relevance and differentiation. A product needs to be relevant and needs to be different. If you are different and you are not relevant, you're just a curiosity. You belong in a museum or a zoo. If you are very relevant and you are not different, then you're just a commodity. And basically what happens is that you have seen this, that we moved, products, they need to be differentiated and they need to be relevant in order to command a premium price. Now, We went from an agricultural society with the extraction of raw materials to manufacturing goods to delivering services. Where we are today is the need to produce and stage experiences a lot more than we did before. Is the experience, is the experiential marketing that's dominating everything. And fundamentally, that leads to a customization of situations. When Apple launched the iPod, they didn't launch a new technology. Technology was there. What they did was they created the experience of people taking 10,000 songs with them when they go on the subway. But at the same time, there is a countercurrent called commoditization that you see with private labels, with white brands or whatever they're called, which basically tries to bring it back to the origins of all this. But only with a focus on differentiation and relevance are we able to create these new experiences. And the innovation paradigm, in order to address this, has to ask 4 questions. The questions you have to ask when you have an idea is that, first of all, does it create new consumers for my business, yes or no? Does it create new benefits for those consumers, yes or no? Does it imply a new channel of distribution, a new route to market, yes or no? And finally, does it create a new occasion of consumption? If the answer is yes to at least one or more of those questions, you are on the right track. Now, if the answer is no to the 4 of them, believe me, forget it. Now, very few ideas cover the 4 questions, answer the 4 questions in a positive way. So, fundamentally, answering those 4 questions is probably the beginning of addressing innovation in a time of crisis. And with fact-based elements, fact-based, because with those, we'll be able to take the next steps. And the next steps are fundamentally to look at not a portfolio of projects. As I said, the best idea, the best way to kill an idea is to turn it into a project too soon. You know, I went on a first date with my wife, which was absolutely wonderful. We were in this beautiful restaurant in New York, and we were having a romantic dinner. If I had come to her that night, and I had told her the first time that 2 years from now, we're going to be married, we're going to be moving to this small town in Germany, in a pretty awful place, working in a absolutely terrible zone and having to spend 12 hours per day working and traveling the rest of my time, I would be turning an idea into a project, should have walked away. So I allowed the idea to be idea for some time before the project came out. And actually, what I described is what happened, but I wouldn't tell her in the first day, and I didn't know. And that's the same thing with ideas for projects as well. You need to allow ideas to be ideas. And basically what you have to ask is 4 questions. And that's very critical for the success of any business. Ask yourself 4 questions. What is it that we know that we know? For the things that we know, you don't need to do certain things. You already know them. You know, don't go and, you know, I used to work for Coca-Cola. I spent 23 years with Coca-Cola all over the world. And we spent billions all over the world discovering that people above a certain age did not like Coca-Cola. I mean, we knew that. I mean, we didn't have to do any research on this. But it's very critical to ask that first question. The second question is that, what is it that we know that we don't know? There are things we know that we don't know in the business. And that's essential that we find out. One that's often forgotten is that, what is it that we don't know that we don't know? If your competition doesn't know that you don't know that you don't know, that's okay. But if the competition knows that you don't know that you don't know, then you're in trouble. And the other one that's often forgotten is that, what is it that we don't know that we know? I have the habit, now that I work as a consultant, every time I talk to a CEO in a company, he says, you know, you have to meet some people here. And the first people I want to meet are normally the oldest people in the building. Who has been working here for 35 years? I want to meet that guy or that girl. I want to talk to her or him. Because they know a lot, and sometimes we don't know that they know. And for each one of those, there is a different strategy. For the things that we know, Basically, you have to focus on the brands, on the health of the business models. You have to do some kind of what I call maintenance market research, but don't spend a lot of money doing what I call the PDO, which is the painful discovery of the obvious. It is a very painful process to discover the obvious. And then you discover that by spending a lot of money. Now, for the things we know that we don't know, then you have to focus on technology. You have to see if you have to acquire new ideas, new technologies. You have to focus on investment rather than just budgeting. You have to look at establishing the value chain and so on. For the things that we don't know, we have to engage scenario plans. We don't know that we don't know. I had an opportunity to meet once Nelson Mandela, and I asked him, how did you know when you came out of prison that this was going to work in South Africa? And he says, I had no idea. And I did not know that I didn't know until I started doing scenarios and imagining the country, imagining, in this case, imagining our companies, imagining how they're going to look like coming out of this. And finally, for the things that we don't know that we know, the focus is on legacy, identifying pockets of opportunity, so on and so forth. So it's essential that we answer those 4 questions. What is it that we know that we know? What is it that we know that we don't know? What is it that we don't know that we don't know? And what is it that we don't know that we know? It's very important that you try to do this from the point of view of your own market strategies. And listen to the 3 voices. We all have been spending lots of money listening to consumers and listening to the marketplace. We don't do enough in listening to our own products, understanding the product. What is it there? Conventionally, in marketing and in new product development, and as a way of out of crisis, people tend to follow innovation in a conventional way, which means that you have form follows function. In other words, you have a function for something and you develop the right form for it. You have a function in a bottle, which is to contain a liquid. So then you develop different forms for that bottle. Now, there is another way of looking at this, which is counterintuitive, which is the opposite, which is function follows form. You start from the bottle and you create something totally new out of it by developing a new form for that new function for that form. And that is something that involves listening to those 3 voices. When you look at the market, basically what most companies are trying to do is try to identify opportunities that catch the emerging trends and at the same time have very little user awareness. What I like to call the fireworks. Everybody wants to be rich and happy rather than poor and unhappy, obviously. That's where we want to be. Unfortunately, most of the marketing budgets of most companies goes into the bandwagon, meaning that they wait until somebody do something, user awareness is there, you catch the emerging trends, and you jump on the bandwagon, as you say, you join the crowd. Now, there's another sector, which is the nostalgic sector. I put a picture here of what in America it's called the jukebox, which is those music machines. When I was a kid, I used to go to a soda fountain in the US, and then you just put a little coin. Whenever that girl walks in, you know, Elvis Presley starts singing, and then, you know, you're on for a good start. So these machines, they still exist. They are now, of course, electronic, and 50,000 of those machines were sold last year in Germany alone for 5,000 euros each. So you do the calculation, it's €250 million. This is a market for these things here, which is not a new technology, it's old news, but as a matter of fact, thrives on nostalgia. And there's a lot of opportunity for nostalgia in times of crisis as well, because people remember some better times. Now, there's another category, which is what I like to call the postmodern products. Lots of money goes into this. Postmodern products, in reality, they are pre-obsolete. And a good example of this is what you have with the cars. Here you have 4 cars that more or less target the same market, which are in those categories. This one here is the Mazda Miata MX-5. 1 million units of these cars have been made since 1989. They were a great concept. People had zero awareness of this, and it was a completely new concept because the British racers of the 70s had disappeared, and this car came along, was developed in California for the whole world, and it's still there. This one here was a nostalgic thing, was MG, which was one of the British racers, trying to develop the car. Then you have here the bandwagon. Suzuki, Daihatsu, all these cars launched an imitation car that they all failed in the marketplace. And the French, they build cars that you know, when you buy a French car, you know that 3 years from now it's going to look old. You know, because they are the most postmodern cars, and you know when you buy a Renault, you know that 3 years from now it's going to look very old. If you buy a BMW, buy a Mercedes, you know that's going to evolve slowly. But the French car is already pre-obsolete the moment you walk out of the dealer with it. And in reality, combining these three voices is what's most important. And then, if the issue is between consumer and market, you focus on that kind of test. That kind of test if it's with the product and market. So you need different kind of assessment. And how you do that is by focusing on two things. Whether the product is unique or whether it's a commodity, whether the product is in a mature or an emerging category. If you have a product, particularly in times of difficulties, if you have a product that is in a unique category, and at the same time, it's a mature type of product, then the focus had to be on the product itself. That's the kind of test you need to do. If you're really talking about, for instance, a unique product in an emerging category, then your consumers, your users, your buyers are the people you need to focus on. And the focus of these verifications changes with the nature of the product and the maturity of the category. And that's very essential because the same test doesn't apply everywhere. In a downturn, there are pressures. There are pressures on costs. Pricing becomes essential. There is a number of issues that happens in terms of efficiency that you need to focus on. And so, I'm just going to list here very quickly before we close what are those elements that in a downturn need to be focused on. The first thing, do not underestimate the power of quick wins. You need to have quick wins. What does that mean? It means that if you're there doing projects, waiting, because 2 years from now things are going to be better and you're going to be okay, you're going to be like those people that go on a diet and they starve to death, but they're going to be perfectly healthy by the time they die. And that's the kind of thing that you need to be careful with. You really need to focus on winning today. There are certain things you can win today. And the team needs to be changed sometimes for that. Some non-premium projects need to be revisited. The back burner, the cupboard, things you forgot. Projects that you left behind, sometimes they need to be revisited because they offer good opportunities. Emerging markets, and this is a presentation that I have given in many markets, in Switzerland, in Sweden, in New York, in Australia, in Japan recently. People are looking at what you are doing in emerging markets as an opportunity. In emerging markets, people tend to think, well, we'll see what they are doing up there and see if we can apply here. Believe me, the world has changed. The world order has changed. Companies like Unilever are now investing in getting ideas from markets like Brazil, like India, like China, to bring new ideas in. Therefore, it's critical that we look at simplicity overriding complexity. Focus on what the competition is doing, and not just the big ones. The small competitions sometimes are far more creative. They have less problems to be innovative, less problems to fail, and they have sometimes the best ideas. And inspiration through metaphors is very important, outside of your industry. If you are in telecoms, look at what the guys in consumer goods are doing. If you are in consumer goods, look at what the industrial marketing is doing. You know, where can you find inspiration through these metaphors? Simplifying the process. A good process never increased the sale of anything. I mean, a good process is a function of good people putting in practice good ideas. It's good to have good processes, but they do not create a new idea. It's not enough. establish new priority criteria, and the focus has to be on the triple effect. The triple effect means market share, gross margin, and revenues. It has to be there. Ideally, you want to have all of those up, because if you sacrifice one of those consistently, you're going to be out of the market soon. Looking for alliances, both conventional and unconventional, and doing these tailor-made solutions with customers and consumers. The other thing is fast track. We have, for instance, been working now with some companies that through some methods that we created for them, we basically can do in 2 weeks what normally takes 6 months to do. People say, well, what is the margin of error? So the margin of error is about 50%. But that's better than waiting 6 months if you are in the middle of a crisis, when at the end of the day, the margin of error is going to be 35% anyway. So you take that risk and you jump into speed in detriment of the margin of error. And, of course, business models have to prevail. Remember that business models are probably the most important source of innovation. In other words, companies that are innovative in business models are companies that have the highest return on their investment. These are not the companies that just innovate in processes, in products, or companies that have new customer experiences. Innovation in business model, innovation in how you do your business is essential for success in the marketplace. And the critical steps on this are fundamentally those. Zero-based budget. Come to the beginning of your budget process, forget everything you did last year, go back to zero and ask the question, do I need it? Do I need this? It's not because you had X million dollars for a particular project last year that this year you're going to increase it by 3%. No, go back to zero, zero-based. What do we need to do? Do we need to do it? No. Handle it as a crisis. Get to know how the downturn is affecting customers and consumers in a different way. Not just in your own products. Ask how their lives are changing as a result of that. And of course, remember that people who handle crisis have to be different. There's different kind of marketing people you need for crisis. You know, it's quite different from the maintenance market that you do. Maintenance marketing in brand management, in brand architecture, positioning is all very nice, but in times of crisis, you also need a different type. And of course, we need to adapt and shift the competences. We need to have this relentless focus on idea generation, on ideation, new criteria for priorities, and at the same time, parallel consumer strategies. Habits are very important. I strongly recommend a book called Habit, which is available in Amazon, which is 95% of what marketers don't like to hear. But habits are there, and in times of crisis, habits come back again. Habits come alive. And people tend to go back to old habits, maintaining loyalty, price points, and all that. So all this requires a new, different set of people. And of course, people hear a lot about open innovation. That's a fallacy that doesn't exist. But you have collaborative innovation, collaboration between companies, between customers and suppliers, between people working in different sectors of the industry, collaborating together, identifying new opportunities, developing this concept of a company within a company, and of course, creating a kind of a war room mentality, meaning that the morale of the troops become elevated by that. And finally, you have to tackle the internal barriers, because there is more internal barriers to innovation than you have external barriers. You know, human nature is towards equilibrium, and we feel very threatened by anything that's really new. New is very dangerous. At the same time, focusing on the short term, you know, and creating a parallel long-term strategy with a sliding cost for funding, because if business goes up, then you have to start funding your long-term. And at the same time, understanding and executing according to this new structure and collaborative innovation at all levels. But most importantly, and here I finish, is to say that do not talk your way out of a problem you have behaved yourself into. It's very difficult to do that. There's no credibility with consumers, with customers, or with anybody. Do not talk your way out of a problem you have behaved yourself into. And companies behave themselves into certain situations, and you cannot just talk your way out of that. Thank you very much.